Who is the strangest person you also ever met? I went to a wilderness survival school and there was this guy there named Charlie who never wore a shirt. Rode this really beat up motorcycle everywhere. And mined Bitcoin for a living. He didn't bring a tent, so he slept on a tarp on the ground for the whole week and ate canned beans even though we provided meals. He cried a lot and hugged everyone at the end of the week. Charlie was pretty cool tbh. Charlie is now a Bitcoin millionaire. I'll bet. Probably still eats cold beans from the can. And cries at the conclusion of meaningful connections. He probably eats them with a toothpick. Fears us, an old guy who my friends and I saw one day after a high school basketball game in our local McDonald's. While we were in line, he just started telling us erectile dysfunction jokes. As weird as that sounds now, it was totally hilarious in the moment. Anyways, we just went our separate ways until we saw him there a week or so later around the same time, and we talked to him. We ended up staying there talking to him for hours to find out that he used to be a monk and had a ton of wild stories from all over the world. He was a genuinely sweet and funny guy. I would see him every once in a while after that, but it's almost been 2 years since I've seen him last. It makes me want to talk to more strangers. But that's probably not the best idea. I was in Waikiki on Oahu, Hawaii. I had been working there for several months in that area. This night I was kind of drunk and walking back to the Ambassador Hotel on Kalako Ave. This man whistled like a demon. He had a ponytail, a guitar on his back and a deep voice. He asked me for a cigarette. He started talking to me about the nature of the universe. He said he didn't like speaking English because it was a liar's tongue, and thus only spoke it sparingly. He told me of things I had done before and things that would transpire for me, in very specific terms, like in ways of names and places he could not have known without me giving very revealing information. He said he would walk me back to my place. There was something about the whole thing that kept me up at night and still does. Some nights I think I met something or someone bigger than myself. I still wonder about it frequently, and it's been 4 years. Met a guy on the Oregon coast walking up from the beach in a parking lot a couple years ago named dubbed Rainbow Joe. He explained to us that he was a part of something called a rainbow gathering. He was like a skinny jolly drugged up Santa Claus, but told us we need to be a part of this rainbow gathering where a whole bunch of people get together and do a whole bunch of drugs, and it's this whole religious experience to kind of free our mind. Super friendly guy. Would not stop talking about the rainbow gathering. Never been. Not sure if it's a fantasy thing, or if there is an actual rainbow gathering. Anyway, he was a pretty strange dude. Used to live in downtown Oakland. One night I was walking home from the bars alone. I'm a pretty small female but never felt scared doing so, and an old homeless man came up and started talking to me. He said he'd walk me home so no one bothered me. Clearly high out of his mind. He then proceeded to tell me his whole life story from when his dad used to beat him and his mother, to the time he cut off all the fingers on his right hand so he would stop smoking crack. He showed me the hand, completely fingerless. He talked the whole walk home and then said goodnight when we got to my building and went on his way. Never saw him again. Maybe not the strangest person, but it's more the coincidence that makes it so strange. There is an old homeless man that my wife and I have run into around town random times in random places. Once in the afternoon at a fishing hole 20 minutes outside of town. About a year prior around 10 PM at a grocery store. And once at a restaurant while sitting down eating brunch roughly 3 months after the fishing encounter. This dude always saunters up out of nowhere and says the same thing. "Swanna hear a joke? Doesn't matter if you say yes or no." He follows with "Swat do you call a flock of ducks flying upside down? Thesaw quacking up." Said this time he always walks away without another word. It is so odd that we have run into the same odd person. We have a theory that has a broken NPC and we are stuck in some strange RPG world, wherein this dude spawns and we have to interact with him. We always joke that Wes'll be on a beach somewhere 20 years down the road and Hes'll appear from nowhere and Wes'll hear the same "Swanna hear a joke?" Sline. My ex-roommate. Threatened me physically one night because I was gone all day and couldn't pay attention to him. Listened to my phone calls. Played with knives to an insane degree. ADHD to the point of monopolizing conversations and looking like he was having seizures rushing to get his words out. And if you broke his stream of words, he got childishly angry. He had this really annoying habit of whipping out his phone or tablet so you can watch whatever movie or show he just spoiled for you when he was explaining the plot minutes earlier. Compulsive liar and horrible with money. He also mirrors people's personalities and follows people everywhere they go. Even if it's to the bathroom. And he pretended to grope his sister. I'm so glad to be rid of that pathological mess of a man. I call her Umbrella Diagram Lady. She is a frequent customer at my work. She's extremely energetic and talks a mile a minute. One day, she comes to the service counter and says she's lost her umbrella. I told her I could take down her info and give her a call if it was turned in. She took the pen and paper from me and spent several minutes drawing out and describing the most basic black umbrella with a push button. When she was done, I said, okay, but what's your phone number? I got a 5+ minute story about how she doesn't like when her phone rings in her basement while she's playing the piano. So she has a special phone that doesn't make noise, but starts blinking a light instead so that it doesn't interrupt her. But then she doesn't always see that. So it would be preferable for me to email her instead. At the end of all of it, she informed me she had already purchased a new umbrella to replace it. That she liked more anyways as it fits into her bag. Either her or the guy who has paced the store every day for 5+ years and has never touched or bought anything. The only time I've ever heard him speak or seen him interact with anyone at all, he pulled a stethoscope out of his bag and asked to listen to my heart. The big ass blind man. This big ass unit was at least 6 feet 8 inches. 385. He was big, okay. Dude was very white but talked like a 90s rapper. He would come into our shop and say, let me look around, let me see what I like, I'm just peeking at the new stuff. Our store moved in the mall a dozen times and he would always find us within like a week and say something along the lines of new digs bitches. It was hilarious. I can't even count how many blind jokes the man made every time he was in. On top of all of this, he would always ask for shoes in a certain color. I want red shoes, but the first 2 or 3 were rarely the right red. The dude must have known our sales tactic or something. Great customer but a weird guy. One day he strolls in with hookers. At least a dozen of them. Dressed in lingerie with at most a short jacket over it. He said, like my girls? To us. I quit shortly after, but I will always remember big ass blind man. Oh, and if you're curious why I don't know his name, he instructed us to call him the big ass blind man. Also his pointer or cane or whatever it's called had a big ass diamond on the end. I was on a cruise recently for 12 days and there was a guy that I noticed on day 1 because he was like HEYYYY. Woohoo. To everyone he walked by. I proceeded to see him everywhere. The ship had like 4,000 passengers for the whole trip. And he was never with anyone else. And he participated in like every show I went to. Got hypnotized. Helped a magician. Etc. Like we even knew his name and my husband would be like, OMG, there he is again. I almost wish I found out his last name because I totally want to see his Facebook. He just seemed so strange but yet so interesting all at once, lol. I call them performance artists. 2 people who made you uncomfortable as if that was exactly their intent and they knew how to be normal. Both didn't know each other. One I met in England and one I met in the US. But they were so similar in that respect. The American one really mastered it. He'd wait for the perfect time to throw in something about masturbation and look pleased with the reaction. Everyone seemed so uncomfortable that even the misfits would try to bail on him. He was so persistent that you couldn't get away from him anyway. I like to put up with it. It was like nobody else realized that it was an act for a reaction. But if you did get it, it was just sort of amusing until it got old. At that point, he would stop. Because he wasn't getting a reaction anymore. Which really proves that he wasn't just weird but wanted to play that role. Probably a homeless man that my mom befriended. He'd clearly been in some sort of accident and had brain damage. He wore a baseball cap most of the time, but he showed us his scar once. He was generally nice, but you could tell he was off. We were sitting outside McDonald's once and he had come over to talk to us again, and my brother had said something teasing to my mom. He felt that my brother was being disrespectful of my mom and didn't like that. Again, generally a nice guy, and he liked my mom and dad. So he told my brother, "Do you see my eyes? They are red. Because I am mad." As in, he was convinced that his eyes would actually turn red when he was angry. His family took care of him as best they could. They'd send him gift certificates for insurance so he could get food, and not alcohol I think, so he ate, and my parents would buy him meals too. Haven't seen him in a long time though. It has to be Miguel. Miguel was from Quebec and I met him in Portugal while studying same film classes. He was super friendly in a weird way. Like not understanding social rules and being way too expressive at times. He picked up the language very quickly, and he also spoke English, Spanish and a bit of Russian. He was mostly stoned during the years I was friends with him. He had the craziest ideas for making movies, but he always did a lousy job. Once he decided to build a giant lobster. Just because. I never understood his mind. Plus he was always begging for money. I met him a few years later in different cities and he was the same. Clearly out of this world. I called him John the Liar. He was a co-worker of mine in college at a sporting goods store. He lied about everything, not just embellishing stories or adding a few extra details. Just straight up lies. He would lie about what he ate for lunch even though I saw him eat it. He told our manager that his dad was a 6'5" Marine who helped take down Osama bin Laden, and then an hour later he told me his dad was a quadriplegic and had been for 30 years. Then he told me he got an override from the administration to take 24 credits one semester as a biology major. Then I found out he was still in high school. It was absolutely psychotic. I finally had to confront him about it when he started telling customers the completely wrong specs on all the guns we carried. He just lied some more and said that I was wrong or that I misunderstood him. Eventually I had to ask my supervisor to schedule me on a different shift because I couldn't take it anymore. An old lady that used to live in my town, who was usually just known as the I Say lady. She was usually seen accompanied by a large dog. She was called that because she started all conversations with adults with I say. She was an absolute terror to children. If a child came within a few feet, she would berate them for being near and say the dog would attack them. The dog seemed more terrified of her, and I never heard of it attacking anyone. We kids all knew to just leave her alone. With adults, she was a totally different person and would be extremely friendly. Adults knew to avoid her too because she would talk to them for hours if you let them and literally chase after you if you tried to leave. Probably this older black gentleman named Mr. Charles. I met Mr. whilst walking the beaches of Fort Lauderdale. While pissed drunk one night. We talked about life and music for like 30 minutes and then went our separate ways, but for the duration of my stay in Florida I ran into him at least 5 more times as he played saxophone on the strip outside my hotel every night. Mr. Charles was a killer saxophone player. Not like sort of good, but this dude literally cold stove played in whatever the NFL equivalent for saxophone players is. I mean like freaky good. He always wore his sax around his neck and would use it to ad-lib things that he would say. Anytime he said something in an exclamatory way, Hesod bust out a fat note on the sax so punctuated. Guy was hilarious. Every time I saw him he was accompanied by a very obviously drug-addicted middle-aged white woman who would try and interject into our conversations but never received so much as a head nod from Mr. Charles. I met Mr. C whilst walking the beaches of Fort Lauderdale, while pissed drunk one night. We talked about life and music for like 30 minutes and then went our separate ways, but for the duration of my stay in Florida I ran into him at least 5 more times as he played saxophone on the strip outside my hotel every night. Mr. Charles was a killer saxophone player. Not like sort of good, but this dude literally cold stove played in whatever the NFL equivalent for saxophone players is. I mean like freaky good. He always wore his sax around his neck and would use it to ad-lib things that he would say. Anytime he said something in an exclamatory way, Hesod bust out a fat note on the sax so punctuated. Guy was hilarious. Every time I saw him he was accompanied by a very obviously drug-addicted middle-aged white woman who would try and interject into our conversations but never received so much as a head nod from MR. I met a black Nazi at a scatter park in Massachusetts. He was wearing a bunch of army shit and climbing all over the ramps like an obstacle course. He ends up getting my attention and kept asking me to guess his first name. He was wearing a military backpack with a patch of his last name on it. I threw out a few guesses to be nice. Then he takes his 2 fingers and slides them down his mustache and says Sadolfs and Thatsos when I noticed that he was rocking a Hitler mustache. I can't remember if he told me to check him out on Facebook or if I just searched for him myself. It was pretty easy because not too many people are going by Adolf. His profile photo was him in a Patriot's hat with the mustache doing a Nazi salute. I still have the photo somewhere on my phone. Just an encounter. But I can't scrape their images from my brain. My family was in line for a ride Disney's Animal Kingdom. There was a family a few people ahead of us in line. It was a mom, a dad, with 2 teenage daughters and 1 teenage son. I can't properly put into words how perfect they looked. Like, all of them were very attractive. Beautiful even. Extremely well dressed. But something was just off about them. Almost like they were droids or something. The thing that really stood out was they were all over each other. In a very sexual way. All of them. The brother and sisters. The mom and daughters. The mom and son. Same with the dad. They were touching each other constantly and would kiss each other on the cheek, lips, and even the backs of each other's necks. They were oblivious to the other people in line. They never even noticed us staring at them for a solid 20 minutes. We couldn't even talk to each other, we were so stunned at what we were witnessing. I still don't understand what I saw or even how to explain how weird it was to see. My stomach still turns when I think about it. One night it was 420 am on 420. One of my roommates and I were on my roof smoking a bowl when this random chick was walking by and wanted to come up, so we threw my key down. She came up and we smoked. 15 minutes later she wouldn't stop talking, like I don't even know how she was breathing, but eventually we were like, alright, it's time for bed and you gotta go. She was pretty cute but like way more annoying than it would be worth. About a week goes by and she shows up to a party donning a wizard staff with like an iPod mini and other random stuff like duct tape to it. Turns out she is homeless and has been couch surfing in this college city and like somehow got here from like California or something. Eventually she leaves after our party got busted or whatever. About a month goes by and she shows up again with a mixed CD for our house with some pretty decent 2007 to 2012 hits on it with the words peeps, hoots and strangers written in Sharpie, and then she left with very few words, never to be heard from again. Hope she's okay. I used to run in drug circles, so I've met a bunch of weird characters. I guess schizophrenic people are cheating, so I'll tell you this little anecdote. About 20 years ago I had a store. Every Monday morning this well-dressed, well-spoken white lady in her early 60s would come in and buy a carton of Marlboro menthols. The weird thing about her is that she reeked of shit. Like she had swam in a river of shit, and I guess she knew it too. Hence the early morning visits when no one was around. After she left I had to air the place out for an hour. I've told the story before and people have said that maybe she had one of those colostomy bags. I don't know. I mean, if her bag was full every time she came in and then exploded under her clothes, then maybe. But there were no visible shit stains on her. As I said, she was well dressed. In my freshman year of high school, I sat down in algebra next to this guy. He seemed normal enough. A little on the odd side, but normal enough. Then in the middle of class, he leans over and says, "That's a nice pencils," in a somewhat disturbing voice. I'm not sure what to say to this. So I just says thanks. Then he asks me, "Ticonderoga. Nice, like has some sort of pencil connoisseur." Then this guy all likes, "Can I see it?" Now at this point I'm a little weirded out and I give the man what he wants. He then proceeds to put the eraser to his nose. and sniff it. One long, hearty sniff. Is some talking He compliments the smell of my pencil, and just goes back to his work. Gives no indication that anything even happened. Man, that was weird. This guy who worked for the IT department back in university. He always wore heavy sweaters. Even in the peak of the summer heat. When he was often outside lugging around CRT monitors. Yeah, I know I'm aging myself, and other heavy items. So he was constantly literally dripping with sweat. Like he had big droplets dropping off of him all over the equipment constantly. On top of that, he seemed to have absolutely no filter. I'm not talking like your Aunt Susan who claims to have no filter after a glass of wine. I'm talking like he had absolutely zero cares about any social norms. Because of this, he loved to curse like a sailor constantly. No matter who was around. He'd walk into a women's studies class in the middle of a lecture to set up an overhead projector, which he exclusively referred to as one-eyed whores, and he'd be like, "Come on, you fucking son of a cunt muscle. Fucking one-eyed whore." While dripping buckets of sweat everywhere as the professor and students all looked on in horror. Knew a guy named Sam. Everyone called him Top Hat Sam. This was because he owned a top hat and wore it everywhere. It was torn and old and looked like it belonged to a homeless clown, but it suited him so well no one really questioned it. The way he spoke almost sounded like a mix between nonsense and prophecy. One minute you'd think he was making some brilliant point, and then he'd start whistling a tune halfway through a sentence and wander away. I don't think he did drugs, but his mind was definitely inhabiting a higher plane of existence. He was also able to pick up an instrument and just start making up random songs which somehow sounded better than when he tried to play not made up music. Guy who lived in a nearby small town who people called Roger Dodger. He was probably in his mid-40s and was mentally handicapped. He came off as creepy because he had an unkempt appearance and a lazy eye, but he was actually really nice. He was a funny dude and would always give me random gifts like postcards. I used to talk to him a lot when my aunt lived in that town, but since she moved like 5 years back I haven't had an excuse to visit that area and I haven't seen Roger Dodger in a while. He hung out at the most popular gas station in town pretty much 24/7. I don't think he worked there. He was always just sitting at the one table inside. He drove a bicycle with a large orange flag and many reflectors on the back, and it would always be in the parking lot outside the gas station. He wore a reflective vest that people like crossing guards wore and his bicycle helmet all the time. You could probably see Roger Dodger from across town with his vest and bike. And when he wasn't at that gas station, he was on the side of the highway riding his bike. He was a really interesting dude who would tell great stories and always seemed super happy and smiley. He was in the paper a lot and would even ride his bike in the parades in town, and people went to see him at the fair like he was one of the attractions. Last I heard, Roger Dodger had passed away from cancer. I have no clue why or how he was so well known in the small town, population of like 700, but everyone knew him and would reference him in casual conversation like he was a celebrity. I wished I could have talked to him again. He was pretty cool. I had a substitute when I was 12 that was an old woman that was obviously paranoid out of her mind. As soon as I saw her, my mind went shit. This is gonna be bad because she was wearing a flamingo pink mohair sweater with mustard yellow, subtly sparkly tights, red cowboy boots, sunglasses, a straw hat, and a large green fanny pack. Its sauce was literally straight out of some Roald Dahl book or something. The whole class. She told us that she had once worked for the devil, as in Satan himself, who controlled the Chicago public schooling system, and that our projector was slowly poisoning us with cancer. And that the Chinese government was watching us through the cameras in the monitor screens of the computers. She refused to go near the whiteboard when the projector on and literally yelped when it turned on and made someone else turn it off. Later, we were apparently being loud. We weren't sot. We were all freaked out and scared of this lady, and so she tuned all the lights off and went, "Now you can't sot do your work because it's us too dark," and just let the class go on for the next 20 minutes with no light while she regaled us with outlandish conspiracies. Public school subs can truly be something else. I never had her again though.